Hello, welcome back to my channel. I'm VA Winter. I'm an indie author and kind of an independent researcher. And this is the second part in my series on witches and the refusal to conform. This one is looking at gender. So this one is titled The Wayward Woman, Gender and the Witch. So the witch has been associated with the female figure since the witch trials in the 17th century and perhaps even before that. That's kind of when it became quite a solid connection. Dominant image of the witch was as, and I referenced this book in my last article and I'm going to reference it again here, it's called Witch Face of Witch, Self-Representations of Women as Witches in Works of Contemporary British Women Writers, and it's by an author called Adriana Mardej Stang. And she says that the image of the witch was of an elderly, lonely woman from a lower social class. That was the image circulated on leaflets and in sermons at the time. That was the stereotype. There were men who were accused and convicted of witchcraft, but those were in the minority. So women and witchcraft have been associated together for a very long time. As time passed though, as discussed in that first part of the series, The Historical Witch in The Once and Future Witches and the Burnings, the role the image of the witch played in the representation of women changed. She's no longer the fairy tale ugly crone, the evil villain in the cartoon, at least mostly. Instead, witchcraft stands for empowerment. The witch is a feminist icon. She is still othered, but women now draw strength from this rather than fear. The origin of the subjection of women to witchcraft accusations seems to lie in fear. So, as Abigail Walker says in her article, Witches in the Queer Representation of Gender in Terror Pratchett's Equal Rights and Weird Sisters, the witch, as an ugly crone, presents a challenge to the patriarchal order as they're seen as unfeminine, unappealing, and of no benefit to heteropatriarchal society. And there's a really good book by Silvia Federici called Caliban and the Witch, and she expands on that view in that book, in which she describes the argument made by a couple of authors called Maria Rosa Dalla Costa and Selma James. And that argument states that the exploitation of women has played a central function in the process of capitalist accumulation, insofar as women have been the producers and reproducers of the most essential capitalist commodity, labour power. In other words, capitalists needed to control women, their bodies and their reproductive power to ensure the supply of labour for the capitalist machine to continue producing and functioning. Federici goes on to argue that she must conclude that witch hunting in Europe was an attack on women's resistance to the spread of capitalist relations and the power that women gained by virtue of their sexuality, their control over reproduction, and their ability to heal. By demonising this control and power that women held over the power of reproduction, the power could instead be placed into the hands of men, and in turn capitalism. And this can be seen in a book called Weyward by Emilia Hart. It's told over 3 different perspectives in 3 different time periods. And one of those is the story of Altha, and she's a young woman living in the 17th century, so kind of around the time that the witch trials were happening. She has a lot of knowledge of healing, connected to sort of magic, and she is accused of witchcraft and tried for killing a man in her village. She does live outside the societal norms of the day. She makes her own path in a world where she is expected to submit to a man, marry and have children. Therefore, she is a threat to the patriarchal system. Because what if more girls see her living that way and decide that they too don't want to marry and have children? And that's a common fear that we can see playing out even in our contemporary society as well. It's on various different areas of conversation and topics, if you like. What if the example of someone living outside of the dominant narrative shows that they too can live in a way that doesn't benefit capitalism, doesn't agree with that dominant narrative? What if the system falls apart? What if change happens and those with privilege no longer have that privilege? As Nezelin Yilmaz Demirkaya says in her article, Scapegoating Non-Conforming Identities, Witchcraft Hysteria in Arthur Miller's The Crucible and Carol Churchill's Vinegar Tom, it could be maintained that witchcraft accusations and scapegoating practices are caused by those who want to keep their privileged status and access to more power. So women are left with a choice in this scenario: conform or risk their lives by living outside of mainstream society. In the present-day narrative in Weyward, which follows a character called Kate, who is fleeing an abusive partner, we see this choice. Kate could have stayed and done the socially acceptable thing in continuing to justify a man's poor behaviour, because to leave is to risk her safety and her life, and the sort of judgment of society, I suppose, as well. In this way, metaphorically, she's making the choice to step outside of societal conventions, much as the woman who chose the life of solitude, such as Altha in that sort of earlier narrative in the 17th century, would have done. If any truly did choose it, she's risking her life and the judgment of society by doing so. And during the course of the novel, Kate finds her way through both reliving her past as well as uncovering the life of Altha, her ancestor who once lived in the cottage that Kate is sheltering in. In uncovering Alpha's story and Kate's legacy of witchcraft, Kate finds the strength to stand up to the man who tormented her. There are hints of the supernatural in the book, but it's nothing like a true fantasy. It kind of leans into magical realism. Kate doesn't really have magical powers, but she does have a connection with the natural world that cannot be entirely explained away by logic and rational thought. It is this power that Kate connects with and accepts as part of herself that gives her the strength and the ability to fight for her own life, to stand up and make her voice heard. Therefore, Emilia Hart links the idea of the witch with the feminist icon, with the empowerment of women. It's possible for Kate in the 21st century that it wouldn't have been for a woman 400 years earlier. Kate becomes what Jacqueline Schaeffler describes in her article Witch Hunt, Persecution of the Other in Representations of Witches and Witchcraft in British and US American Literature, as a confident woman who does not rely on the presence of a man in her life, and this therefore makes her a threat to patriarchal standards of living. This would make her a figure to fear, as Schaeffler phrases it. In the 17th century, this fear would likely have led to an accusation of witchcraft, but because her narrative takes place in the 21st century, Kate is able to take hold of this new confident persona and use it to fight back against the abusive man she's fled, who could be argued stands in as a metaphor for the witch-finders and for the patriarchal world that created them. On the other hand, Kate's power can only exist because of the women who have come before her, fighting for their rights over the centuries, and that's highlighted in the narrative by the use of the three different women spread across time. Kate stands on their shoulders. Her story cannot exist without theirs. In Weyward, as I've said, both Kate and Alpha are linked with nature. Alpha through her herbs and healing abilities, and Kate through her sort of preternatural connection with birds. This almost supernatural link that she has with the natural world is an important part of the story, and that's a motif that comes up time and time again in narratives about women and witches. As Myers Addison Enlow says in her article Enchanted Empowerment, Witches, Gender and Identity in Young Adult Literature, the witch and nature are woven together. Enlow argues that portrayals of women as witches are linked with the environment to create gendered land boundaries that facilitate oppression. In other words, women are linked with nature through the idea of witchcraft in order to enable their oppression through their association with the land. Enlow quotes another author called Carolyn Merchant, not sure how you say that, and she also says that once the nurturing earth image became a cultural constraint restricting the types of socially and morally sanctioned human actions allowable with respect to the earth, such as commercialization and industrialization, image of the earth became no longer a nurturing mother, but something hindering forward progress. The earth had to be dominated and controlled in the name of capitalist progress, as did women. Therefore, linking the two does make some sense. Both are seen, as far as capitalism is concerned, as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. And that's done by othering both women and the land. By linking women to the land, women are dehumanized in a way. Therefore, their exploitation as the providers of labour for capital isn't always questioned in the way it should be. Through their othering as witches, women have been exploited by capitalism and the patriarchal system it flourishes within. However, once a tool of oppression, witchcraft has become a source of empowerment for women, as illustrated in Weyward by Emilia Hart. The novel explores the evolution of witchcraft alongside women's rights, showing how they are tied together and how the empowerment of women has only been possible because of generations of effort. The figure of the witch is now seen as something positive, as is generally the idea of women having more rights. Women are still othered and are still treated as a resource to be exploited in the same manner as the earth and land we live on. By linking the two, capitalists justify their exploitation, intimating that women are simply an extension of nature and not human beings in their own right, and in this way, the witch is a metaphor for the woman as other.